Okay, let's go through some responses that have been influential to global skepticism, right? So again, global skepticism, for our purposes, we were looking at the simulation hypothesis and Descartes, at least where he gets to by the end of the first meditation, right? So we're worried about this, how can we know that there's anything other than ourselves, if that's even a thing? How do we respond, right? So the first way you might respond is just to take like our our common sense beliefs about the world as innocent until proven guilty, right? You might not find these responses compelling either, right? And that's okay, right? But these are some ways people have responded in the past. So David Hume says something like the following, right? He says something like, our beliefs about the world are reasonable to accept unless we have a compelling reason to reject them. And there isn't a compelling reason to think that we're globally wrong about everything, right? So we should not throw them out. Innocent until proven guilty, right? So we recognize that knowledge is tentative. We might be wrong, but this is sort of like where we're at, right? Unless there's a compelling reason to take global skepticism seriously, we shouldn't. So and that's not fair to Hume, but I mean that's one way you might respond to this kind of skepticism. Another way you might respond, Bertrand Russell gives us a best explanation argument. Go back to what we had to say about, reflective equilibrium. And he says, look, my sense data is such and such, right? I have these experiences, and it sure looks experience-wise like I'm, you know, not in a simulation, or I'm, not radically deceived by a evil demon. What's the best explanation for that? One explanation that I have, the sense data that I have, is that there's an evil demon there to get me. Another explanation is that I'm in a radical, a perfect virtual reality simulation. And another one is just that my sense data is, caused by or, connected in some way to a physical world that's around me that, I'm interacting with. And that's why I have sense of. That's why it feels or seems to me, like I'm experiencing a world that is, technicolor and has shapes and objects and people and birds and stuff like that, right? He thinks the best explanation for why we're having sense data of the such that we are having is because there's an actual physical world out there that we're interacting with. So that's his response to global skepticism. Third way you might respond is G. Moore. His really famous response to Descartes is to say, here's a hand, and here's another hand, and thus I have disproved Descartes. And he's not being flippant. He's not just sort of rejecting this global skeptical idea without even giving it any sort of consideration. He's trying to flip the argument, right? So the phrase people often use is, one man's modus tollens is another man's modus ponens. He's looking at the structure of the argument and he's saying, look, I can give you an argument that's got this, that's just as compelling for the for the possibility that I'm not globally deceived, right? Think about Descartes' argument, right? Descartes says something like, if I know that I'm, if I know that I'm in like a physical world, like if I know that I'm not dreaming, then I know that I can rely on my senses, right? I don't know that I'm not dreaming, so I can't really rely on my senses and, stuff like that. If I know that I'm not being deceived by an evil demon, then I know that the world as I perceive it exists. That's not his argument, but he's arguing something like this, right? If I know there's not an evil demon, then I know that I can rely on my I can rely for Descartes on composite and non-composite truths being, accurate accounts of how things are, right? I don't know that I'm not being radically deceived by an evil demon, so global skeptic, then I don't really know anything other than that I exist, right? And I'm a thinking thing. That's sort of where Descartes goes. What Moore's doing is saying something similar, right? He's like, look, if I know that I have a hand, right, then I know that I'm not being radically deceived by an evil demon. Or if I know that I have a hand, then I know that I'm not in a virtual reality simulation. Well, look, here's a hand, and here's another one. So I do know that I have hands, right? If I know anything, I know that I have hands. Therefore, I know that I'm not in a virtual reality simulation. So what he's doing is he's just taking the argument of the global skeptic and he's just saying, look, here's an equally compelling argument for the proof that I do know things and that I'm not radically deceived. So there's my response. Here's a hand. There's a hand. Another way you might respond, you might do something like David Chalmers. So you might say, look, we cannot know really that we're not in a virtual reality simulation. In fact, we probably are. But that's okay. Even if we're in a virtual reality simulation, we can know all sorts of things about that simulation that we're part of, right? We know what the simulation is like and what our experience of it is like. We might be wrong about fundamental reality, right? Fundamental reality might be nothing other than the dream of a god, or some mental states in the head of an evil demon, or it might just be a virtual reality simulation, not particles. But that's okay. That just means that we're wrong about something about fundamental reality. We're still, we can still know that there's chairs and there's other agents that we interact with, and there, we have the various. I would still have a hand. It would just be a virtual reality hand, right? So he says, yeah. Possible the global skeptic might be right. We might be in a virtual reality simulation or something like that, but there's still all sorts of kind of knowledge that we can get. And then last kind of response we're going to look at, you might ask, well, why should we, like Descartes, take the mind as more primary than the physical? And lots of people have argued this way, right? Some people have said, look, there's a kind of a maleness to Cartesian reasoning. There's this, just right from the get-go, separation between body and nature. The physical and the rational as are taken like as a just a basic fundamental dichotomy about the world. And maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's not a legitimate move, right? The rational mind is taken as more primary than sort of like a physical body, and more understandable, and more present and more basic than sort of like the natural world or the emotive world or like our connections to a physical world. And somebody might say something like, look, if I have to sort of start, which one do I take as more basic, or which one do I take as more likely, my mind is real or my body is real? Maybe it makes more sense to say start from the thought that actually, if I know anything, I know that I have a body, right? That there is a world that exists here and exists outside of myself, and maybe that is more fundamental than to even think that I'm a thinking thing. Maybe that is the leap. So somebody might say, why start where Descartes starts? Maybe just deny the assumptions of the argument to begin with, right? Anyways, there's 5 responses to Descartes explained horribly. Take your pick.